Okay, so now that a lot of Americans are waking up and realizing that we're in an oligarchy, I want to explain like how an oligarchy retains power and why protesting, going like on a march, holding up signs, calling your politicians, signing petitions doesn't do anything. Like it's not going to change things because the way that an oligarchy rules is so much more complex than that. And I know you motherfuckers have short attention spans, but this is important, so stay the fuck with me, okay? The first way is convincing the American people that the system is fair, like hard work pays off, or you need to pull yourself up by your bootstraps and you'll be successful. For example, many Americans are working 2 jobs, they have a side hustle, they're working so hard, yet they're not becoming wealthy. They're barely scraping by, and the system wants you to believe that that's your fault. Then on the other side of that, if you amass $1 billion, then you must deserve it because that's what the free market awarded you. The idea that anyone can succeed if they work hard enough is false, and let me explain why. The reality is that today in America, your opportunities or where you fit into the system mostly depend on where your parents stand in that system, aka how much they earn, how much education they have, and who they know. Okay, let's look at education for a second. Data from the Department of Education shows that 10 years after starting college, the top 10% of earners from all universities make about $68,000 a year. But for the top 10% of graduates from the most prestigious universities, that number jumps to 220,000. Wealthy parents do so much shit to get their kids into these elite colleges. Bribery, we all saw on the news, paying people to take their children's tests, Now let's lightly touch on the topic of geographic segregation and education. Race is such a huge factor in this, and for people listening to that and you think, oh no, race doesn't play a role, blah, 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 shut the fuck up and listen to this fact, okay? School districts that are predominantly white get $23 billion more funding each year than districts that serve predominantly students of color. There's been so many studies that show how important early education is in a child's brain development. And for wealthy people, they can afford to pay for music, poetry, putting their kids in sports. But poor people, they cannot. They don't have the means to do that. And so that plays a big part in their child's brain development. The second way an oligarchy retains its power is through bribery. And other countries do bribery in a much more obvious way, but America does it in a more subtle and perfectly legal way. The most obvious way is lobbying. These corporations are lobbying for lawmakers to create laws that benefit them, and a lot of the times it's not good for the American people. So basically the government is sitting there taking money from the corporations and making laws for them. They're not making laws for you, they're making laws for the corporations. Another way that corporations influence policy is a very similar way in which they donate to particular candidates who they know will listen to them and pass laws that will benefit them. Another way, bribing journalists and their news outlets, and this is something that we are seeing a lot of recently. Jeff Bezos, The Washington Post, among some other ones. Some more subtle ways of bribery are whining and dining journalists in Aspen, giving large donations of money to universities, and these universities then don't go and publish studies that would negatively affect the way that these corporations look among the American people. Or donating a mass amount of money to public television, and then the public television doesn't post a documentary that criticizes that corporation or their CEO. The third way an oligarchy retains its power is probably the one that we see the most, or at least I recognize the most, and that is diverting the public's attention, towards scapegoats, such as immigrants, African Americans, Latinos, Muslims. Some people aren't ready for this, but the left versus the right. They are just dividing you guys so hard against each other that it's oh, the left's responsible for this, oh, the right's responsible for that. Bro, that's not the problem. It's the oligarchy is the problem. They're just diverting your attention. Americans who are angry and suspicious of one another will fight over the crumbs rather than join together against those who have run off with most of the pie. Unfortunately, in recent years, Trump is the best thing that has happened for the American oligarchy. In this paragraph does a good job at explaining some of it, so I'm going to read it. His arguments about them are completely false, of course. This is about him dividing us. Undocumented workers aren't taking away the jobs of American citizens. Are you in the fucking fields picking berries? No, the fuck you're not. Okay. They aren't committing more crimes. The media and these news outlets will make you think that because they're picking these stories to push their own narrative. Again, the news and the media outlets are biased and they're owned by the oligarchy. Immigrants aren't draining social services. Muslims aren't terrorists. Black athletes who protest police brutality are no less patriotic than any other Americans, nor are Democratic representatives of color. What Americans do in their bedrooms and with their bodies is their own business. What corporate executives and Wall Street financiers do in boardrooms and executive suites affects all of us. Back to my original point. Okay, protesting, calling your politicians. If you call your politicians, they're not going to have a sudden change of heart, okay? Or if you go on a protest and march for one day, the corporations will still be lobbying the politicians and they'll still be creating laws that are keeping all of us in the same place. What we need to do is we need to force the government and the corporations' hands. And what I mean by that is making their pockets hurt. They're not, like I said, they're not going to have a sudden change of heart because you wrote a letter about blah, 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 blah. No, you need to make their pockets hurt, and then they will listen. And the way to make their pockets hurt is through organized civil disobedience. And a lot of the stuff that I talked about, basically everything that I talked about, is in this book called The System, Who Rigged It and How We Fixed It by Robert Reich, if I pronounce his last name right. I highly encourage all Americans to go read it so you can understand like what's going on in more detail, and how we can fix this oligarchy and dismantle it.